Hola a todos, buenos días, ¿cómo están? Espero que estén muy bien. El día de hoy voy a compartir una actualización sobre el aprendizaje del español. Vamos. Hello folks, today I'm going to talk about my 500-hour update with learning Spanish, primarily with the Dreaming Spanish platform, but with other things as well. So I'll talk about 4 different topics today. The first one being a quick update, what I can and cannot do. Then talk about ideologies in language learning that I'm seeing. I'll also talk about beginning speaking lessons, and then I'll briefly read from a book because I think that it's underutilized by the language learning community. From what I can see, I think there are a lot of benefits to reading in addition to listening, and I think it's really enjoyable to read as well. So let's go. Okay, so I'm at 500 hours now, which is about 15 months, I guess, 14 or 15 months after I began learning Spanish. So this is probably averaging a little bit over an hour a day, I would say. Primarily, for example, I drive to work and that takes about half an hour each way. So I get an hour of listening just in the car. And so without really trying much, it's pretty easy to get to 500 hours after 14 months or so. I've also had significant input when I traveled to Mexico a couple of times during the summer, and that was quite helpful in, of course, immersing myself in that language for a period of about 2 weeks in total. Nonetheless, after 500 hours, I can definitely say that listening is so much easier now than it was. I still can't listen to advanced content, but I can listen to lots of intermediate level content and understand 80 to 90% of things. If people speak really fast, that's still quite difficult for me. The biggest difference between, I would say, 300 hours and 500 hours is that I could put on something on the, like I can put on a podcast, or I can, listen to some conversation pretty easily with minimal effort. If it's obviously slow enough and if it's using vocabulary that I can understand, without really expending much in terms of mental agility or mental effort. This is a big advantage because in the first 250 hours or 300 hours, even if you try to listen to something that is relatively simple, your brain will be working overtime to try to decipher it. Whereas at 500 hours, I can definitely say that it's no longer an effort to be able to listen and understand a lot of intermediate level content. There are still, intermediate level content that I cannot fully grasp. Maybe I'm only understanding 75% of what's being said. But even there, I'm noticing that my brain is not having to work so hard to be able to understand what is being said. And so I imagine that by 800 hours or so, I should probably be able to understand a lot more of that intermediate level content. And again, it just becomes so much easier after a year to be able to listen to stories and read books and listen to things without expending much effort. So I think the biggest difference is not necessarily even my level of understanding, but rather the amount of effort required to make that understanding happen. And of course, it's all subconscious in your brain, but at the same time, you feel it, right? You feel that after you listen to a podcast, after, if you've only been learning for 2 or 3 months, it's extremely tiring and taxing, and you're like, well, I can't really do this. I can't keep going on like this. But I do think that if you pace yourself and listen to content that is comprehensible, it's a lot more enjoyable because you really shouldn't be taxing yourself so much to be able to listen and understand. And at 500 hours, I can definitely see the progress. Or I should say, I can feel the progress happening. Okay, let's move on to the second topic now. So the second topic is ideologies in language learning. And so there's a bunch of people online that keep arguing about, is this the best thing to do in terms of being able to learn a language quickly? Can you learn in 6 months? Can you learn a language in 8 months? Can you learn it in 1 week? Of course, there's plenty of ideologies behind language learning. People who state that you must learn grammar, people who state that you must listen to 2,000 hours of input before you can even utter a word of that language, or before you should utter a word of that language. In my opinion, I'm rather utilitarian in these things. You should do what works for you. Most of these ideologies are theoretical, and that means that whether or not they may apply to a general population is irrelevant, because you should find out what actually works for you. It's kind of like different kinds of diets or exercise. At the end of the day, the one that you should use is the one that you like and the one that you can stick to, because that's the one that's likely to be resulting in progress. If you do something every day and you like it, most likely it's going to lead to progress. So stick with that and don't listen to people who state that you have to be very rigid in your ideology. I think that's a mistake. All right, so a couple of weeks ago, I began speaking lessons with a tutor, and so I began after 500 hours. I think this is a good time, at least for me, to begin speaking lessons. So as I mentioned before, I can understand intermediate level content, and so when I listen to my tutor, he's from Mexico, I can definitely understand what he's saying. It's still difficult to speak, but that's exactly what these lessons are for. And he goes through various activities and things to help me to express, what's, for example, what's in a photo, how to describe things that are present, and these sorts of vocabulary building exercises. But nonetheless, I can understand what he's saying, and I think I'm very glad that I did wait 500 hours, because if I had not waited, then I probably would be spending a lot of mental energy in understanding rather than in spending that energy in trying to produce some output. So I don't think it's necessary to wait longer than 500 hours, at least in my opinion. If you want to wait, that's fine, of course. But if you want to try to get to an end goal earlier, then I think speaking when you can already understand, kind of when somebody is talking to you in a way that a teacher would speak to you, I think that's enough to be able to have a conversation. So I don't see the reason why you should wait for, let's say, 1,000 hours before you start to speak. I think it's sufficient if you can understand what other people are saying to be able to then move into trying to produce some output. So that's that. We'll see how it goes. I have 2 lessons a week for the next couple of months, and maybe I'll increase it to 3 lessons a week, but the goal is to be fluent by the end of next year. So the final thing I want to talk about today is reading, and so I've really enjoyed reading Spanish stories recently. In particular, I have this book which I found on Amazon. It's quite a nice book. It has 80 different short stories in Spanish. It's pretty nice, and I'll read to you from one of the pages here. So as an example of how I'm reading, here is a paragraph from the 7th story, Un paseo al zoológico. Gabriel y Luisa eran hermanos muy unidos, siempre jugaban juntos, se divertían mucho. Luisa siempre tenía sorpresas para su querido hermano Gabriel. ¿Adivina a dónde te voy a llevar?, preguntó Luisa a Gabriel. ¿A dónde?, pregunté Gabriel emocionado. Él nunca podía adivinar las sorpresas que ella le hacía. Mira a tu alrededor, mira tu habitación y adivina, dijo ella. Está bien, dijo Gabriel, mirando por todas partes. La habitación estaba llena de pósters de animales grandes y pequeños. Su habitación era muy colorida. Gabriel tenía 12 años. Su hermana tenía 19 años. A Gabriel siempre le gustó los animales, desde que era un bebé. Anyway, you can see my accent is not great, but it's, I think, at least understandable for now. We'll see how that improves over time. It is interesting to note that since my tutor is Mexican, I can already see that most likely I am going to start speaking with a more Mexican accent, or certainly more Mexican vocabulary in due course. But it's been great. Like, the progress from just listening to Dreaming Spanish videos and watching Dreaming Spanish videos has been fantastic. I do supplement it with reading, and I actually do some other things as well when I like to. So, for example, there are some workbooks that I have for Spanish, and maybe I'll talk about them later, but if I have time and I have a desire, then I can use those to do some exercises for vocabulary building and things of that nature. I don't do it very often. but it is certainly something that might become more useful down the line. But other than a lot of listening, a lot of watching, and some reading, I'm not really doing too much else, except of course doing these speaking lessons, which I just started. So that's my 500-hour update. Hope you got something out of this video. If you like it or you have some comments, please do let me know down in the comment section. Until then, adios.